been really mad at somebody you work with? Somebody you trusted, who one day did something and put you in a bad spot and then left you there to dig yourself out? It stinks, doesn't it? I was working with someone for 2 years. We'll call her Cruella DeVille. We were developing an executive assessment center for a business school. The purpose of the center was to bring in teams of executives, have them run a fictitious company for a couple of days, and then assess their leadership skills. After 2 years, we were finally running our first real center with our first client. It was the opening dinner. The room was chock full of VIPs. It was time for me to get up and explain to them what they'd be doing for the next 2 days. I got up out of my chair, and I started in on my well-prepared speech. I got about 2 sentences in when Cruella jumped up out of her chair, and she said, "Actually, this is the way we'll be doing it." And she went on to explain it in her own words. I was dumbfounded. She had just hijacked my speech. Anger rose up inside of me. How could she humiliate me in front of the client? I was hurt. How could my trusted colleague betray me like that? But here I stood in front of a room full of VIPs. I had to stay strong. I had to stay positive. And I did, and I made it through the rest of the evening. But when I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I barely slept. I was seething inside, and then I worried, what happens if I lose my composure in front of those executives tomorrow? Not to mention the fact that I was going to be telling them about the importance of peer feedback the next day. Now, who would I be if I didn't do it? I needed to speak to Cruella. The next morning, we arrived an hour before the participants. I pulled her aside and I told her that I was really uncomfortable with what she had done the night before, and that I thought that we needed to be a united team in front of the client. Well, she agreed, and she apologized. I also told her that I wasn't competing with her. I wanted to work with her, not against her. This was a breakthrough moment in our relationship. Yes, Cruella was impulsive and reckless, but she showed me she wasn't evil through and through. She was more like the Queen of Hearts, just lopping off the heads of people who inadvertently got in her way. We worked together for the next 6 years. Some of it went smoothly, and some of it didn't. But we learned how to work together and support each other the best we could. This is what life is like in the real world of work. It's messy. It's unplanned. It can be ugly at times. It can be tedious, too. You wouldn't believe the number of details we had to pay attention to run an assessment center. People often don't realize how tedious work can be, even at the highest levels. I've been a leader in many different contexts. I've been an engineer, a professor, a consultant. I have led projects, teams, and organizations. I've worked in high-tech, biotech, retail, academia, for-profit, not-for-profit, public, private. I've managed up, I've managed down, I've managed across functions, I've managed across cultures. Snap, crackle, pop, you name it, I've done it. But my favorite kind of leadership, however, is thought leadership. And after all that experience and, quite a bit of thinking, I've come to the conclusion that my kind of leadership is real. First of all, it's real because you can't learn it in a book. You have to learn it in real life. Trust me, I've read a lot of books. I have a PhD in psychology, and you can read about something as much as you want, but until you've done it, you just don't know what it's like. It's kind of like driving a car. Just because you've got that written test, it doesn't mean you know how to drive. Secondly, real leadership stands for something. R-E-A-L. Successful leaders need to be resilient, empowered, authentic, and limber. In fact, we all need to be resilient, empowered, authentic, and limber to succeed in life, no matter what we do. Back at the assessment center, I was resilient in the moment when Cruella hijacked my speech. I was empowered to talk to her the next morning. I was authentic in the way that I communicated with her. And I was limber to flex as she transformed into the slightly less evil queen. I have lots of stories like this from the workplace, but I want to tell you why I became a thought leader. It started several years ago, soon after I had a daughter. As a parent, I felt like I had gone down the rabbit hole and found this whole new world where the parents around me were living in a different reality from where I had come. Let me explain. I raised my daughter with the tools I had from my upbringing, learning life lessons by trial and error, and giving her wisdom and guidance along the way. The goal was for her to grow up and be successful and live on her own. But it turns out I was doing it completely differently from the parents around me. It turns out their goals were completely different from mine. They wanted their kids to be happy and protected against hurt and challenge and danger and what I would call the real world. They also had their kids' lives planned out for them. I found out at the preschool playground, for example, that they had their kids in swimming lessons starting at 18 months old. They had them in piano lessons and on soccer teams at 4 years old. They had tutors teaching them how to read to get a jump start on kindergarten. And this was all to get them into college. I was so surprised. I just wanted my kid to go to preschool so she could socialize with other kids, and maybe bring home some cute art for the fridge. And what surprised me more than all the planning was how much they protected their kids from experiencing any pain or difficulty. They hovered over them like those famous helicopter parents. And they removed the barriers out of their way, like those famous lawnmower parents. We've all heard of the everyone gets a trophy trend. I've been there and seen it firsthand. I saw my daughter tie with 4 other kids for 3rd place. Yeah, incidentally, it was last place. Yeah, she knew she had lost. That didn't fool her. But as I stood there watching the other parents taking pictures of their kids holding their trophies, I had to wonder, who's enjoying these trophies more? Is it the parents or the children? It was at that moment that the thought leader in me kicked in. I realized we were operating one way as parents and in a different way as business leaders. It didn't seem reasonable to protect kids at home and expect them to be strong when they got to the workplace. I've worked with a lot of adults who were raised by helicopter parents. We call them millennials. Okay, not fair. Not all millennials were raised by helicopter parents, I know. But beware, because even the ones who weren't, they grew up in an educational climate of excessive praise and grade inflation and rewards. We've heard the expressions like, everyone's an artist. It's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. We're all unique and special like a snowflake. If only the workplace were so generous. At work, I noticed as a professor that my college students were not as interested in learning as they used to be. They were all about the grades. They didn't want to have essays on their tests, just multiple choice, so they wouldn't have to think about it anymore. When they turned in papers, I found that a number of them couldn't write And none of them seemed to be able to proofread or even simply turn on a spell checker. I really worried for them that they weren't ready for work. At work as a consultant, I noticed changes in younger workers too. I told you about the assessment center. Well, I've been running that for 10 years now, and I found that the interns who come in are less and less willing to do the tedious work, and they demand more and more to do the high-profile work. Now, I've told you also how many details we have to pay attention to run an assessment center. We all do, from top to bottom. But the interns would complain, and they wouldn't proofread documents, and they wouldn't check files to make sure they were complete. And then we would have some incidents in front of the executive participants, and it would look really bad. Well, when I went to give the interns feedback on this, they got mad. And they told me I was too picky and old school. Well, am I? I mean, I need to be able to take feedback too, right? Yeah, I may be a little. It might surprise you to know I've actually given this a lot of thought, being a thought leader and all. But here's the deal. Yeah, it is important to stay limber and roll with the times, and the times are changing faster than they ever have before. But some things remain the same. And here's where that PhD and all that reading come into play. The fact is, human behavior has fundamentally remained the same for thousands of years. Yes, we do have new technologies, but we still live in the same real world where people get hurt, where there are winners and losers, and where people don't always play nice. Look around us at our business leaders. Look at our political leaders. Now think about the best leaders, the leaders who you really admire. Notice how they are resilient, empowered, authentic, and limber. All my experience and education have taught me an important lesson. There are no fairy tale jobs. There is no happily ever after. To be successful as a leader and in life in general, we need to keep it real. We need to be resilient, to be strong, to handle those barriers that do get in our paths. We need to be empowered, to have the courage to try new things and take responsibility. We need to be authentic, to be true to ourselves. And we need to be limber, to remain agile and open to change. That's what real leadership is.